We're on to the last session before lunch, which is a sort of late lunch, no harm in that. Judging by the tone of this morning thus far, I think there might be a lot of agreement on this next one, because it's all about flexibility and giving people options. Academic credits available for a year of work-based learning, with an option for students to study within a framework of 4 years full-time or 3 years PPE. We've got three speakers again, and first up from the University of Westminster, Stephen Brookhouse. Please welcome him.
Okay, thank you. I thought actually for a moment I was going to be in the graveyard slot between you and a free lunch, but we seem to move this around. Okay, a better balance between the schools and practice, the potential of work-based learning, and potentially a better deal for students. These are the key characteristics of this option for professional education. At first, this looks like the most vocational option with embedded practice-based learning, but it's also potentially the most flexible if we allow it to be. The key constant being a year of credit-bearing work-based learning. 4+3 also looks like a more balanced approach to the partnership between schools and practice. And I want to stress that at its best, it is a partnership, not them and us. It will also put a greater onus on practice to contribute more to architectural education. Therefore, it needs both partners to think carefully about how to contribute more effectively, to look at what practice and the schools do best and share those advantages and challenges. Fracking in South Africa, a new urban community in Shanghai, a film school in Puglia, and Utopia on the Thames estuary. That's a snapshot of current Masters Design Studios at Westminster. I could also add the research topics of postgraduate history and theory dissertations. Design exploration on this scale and depth is commonplace in all our schools, and we must not lose this when developing in the workplace the design and transferable skills required for future practice. The schools rightly take the risks that practice cannot, and this option allows the schools and practice to do what they do best, without schools simulating practice and practice imitating schools. Work-based and blended learning have a significant role to play, and the credit-bearing work-based year is an opportunity to bring practice and schools together as delivery partners in this joint venture and build on the experience and skills that are uniquely provided by practice and referred to by John, Jack, and James. I believe it follows that in this partnership, if we value 4 years of teaching, learning, and assessment and a 1-year work-based study, then the 2 years minimum of work-based learning and professional development leading to registration must also be equally valued and assessed at the appropriate level. If we fail to do that, then we give a signal that we don't value the PPE in the same way as academic achievement and risk isolating rather than integrating practice-based learning in the education of future architects. But this partnership is not risk-free or pain-free. There are differences in purpose and objectives. We've heard it earlier, schools also have embedded QA, validation and prescription. Are we going to impose this regime on practice? Importantly, best practice is not universal. PDR returns indicate that many offices fail to fully mentor their trainees. Returning students sometimes feel that practice has not made the most of what they have to offer, and they've lost the opportunity to develop their skills. 10 to 20% are Part 3s with at least 2 years practice experience and a Part 3 course under their belts fail the final examination. This suggests that experience by itself is not enough. To quote the German proverb, experience is a museum of mistakes. Professional education is at its most effective when we reflect on professional experience in an informed way. To misquote Sean, when we think professionally. There are also the challenges of economic cycles and providing the resources within practice to deliver, and the important principle of parity, giving students equal access to good practice. In short, we know that practice has the desire, but also does it have the capacity? And what about students? We've no hard evidence yet, but students will see that there's a trade-off between 5 years of full-time study, the additional debt, and the salaried opportunities offered by practice, and they will make up their own minds. As a profession, we need to consider how this model of 4+3 will work across the majority of schools. And this will require a step change in practice support and a re-evaluation of the importance of workplace learning in educating our future architects. There's much positive work to do, and I support this proposal. Thank you.
Next up from Building Design Partnership, David Cash. Welcome.
Well, without wishing to sound overly melodramatic, I want to point out that an architecture time bomb is waiting to go off in the UK in 2016, less than 18 months from now. This is when the first cohort of Part 1 graduates to have been faced with the £9,000 tuition fee will obtain their first degree. And by then, very many of them will already have accumulated a level of debt well in excess of £40,000. When they do their sums, the idea of financing a further 2 years of academic study in order to qualify as an architect may well be too much for many to contemplate, especially in view of the fact that architecture is not the most lucrative of professions anyway, especially if a recession happens to be looming on the horizon. We could end up facing a severe decline in the number of new recruits to our profession. Within BDP, we select our graduate intake each year very carefully because it is from this group of young people that the future leaders of our firm will come. Currently, we have 44 Part 1 students across the 6 UK studios, and of these, 27 are on their second year out or more in practice. Already, that's over 60%. Whilst there may be several reasons for taking more than one Part 1 year out, in the majority of cases it is undoubtedly financial. Thus it seems inevitable that as the impact of the higher fees comes through, the proportion taking 2, 3 or even 4 years out will increase for financial reasons. Thus the average time for an architect to become fully qualified seems set to increase, substantially above the current figure, which we've already heard of 9.5 years. I'm sure that none of us wish to see the architectural profession within the UK only being open to those students who have been fortunate enough to receive financial support to see them through the lengthy training period. After all, surely it is not the length of the academic study period, but rather the quality of the learning experience and the knowledge gained which counts. Also, we need to remember that the study of architecture is broadly based. It embraces both art and science and much else in between. As such, it requires a diversity of skills. I believe there needs to be flexibility and a variety of educational approaches to instill the required range of abilities. I think that as practitioners, we need to recognise that the role we play in the training of young architects is going to need to change in future in response to this new context. This is why, when I was approached over a year ago by Satwinder Samra of the University of Sheffield School of Architecture to work with him on a new Part 2 course, I was very pleased to accept. Since then, Satwinder and his colleague Alex Maxwell have been putting flesh on the bones of their original idea, so that a structure for the new optional course is now in place. It will be known as the Collaborative Practice Master of Architecture programme, and for that proportion of students which elect so to do, it is based on the idea of fifth year being an earn-as-you-learn programme. During that year, while students will spend the majority of their time working in practice and thus earning, with the support of an office-based mentor, they will also spend a proportion of their time completing academic modules. The intention is that some, but not all, of these modules will relate directly to work with which the student is involved within the office. Their academic work will be carried out primarily from within the practice office, under guidance from a visiting tutor, and thus remotely from the school in Sheffield. BDP is one of 7 practices which are participating in the pilot scheme, which starts in the autumn of this year. The others involved are AHMM, Hawkins Brown, Penoyer and Prasad, Procter & Matthews, John McCaslin and Partners, and Carmody Groark. The target intake for this first pilot year is just 10 to 15 students, and we certainly look forward to playing our part in doing our best to ensure that it's successful. We welcome having the opportunity to be in the programme and look forward to liaising with other schools in the future. It represents a genuine shared approach between students, practice and academia, and should be a benefit to all. So I have no hesitation in recommending to Council that this motion be carried. Thank you.
Final speaker before discussion from Cardiff University, Dr. Andrew Roberts.
Thank you. When I was preparing this, I had the RIBA journal with its latest architect appointment skills survey in it, and it had the usual that there's a perception that graduates lack the knowledge and skills to be able to practice architecture, and as usual, some blame that on schools for not focusing enough on reality and perhaps too much on theory. But as an educationalist, I'm strongly aware that students learn best when they're in situations that are directly related to the task being undertaken. Indeed, there is a good body of research within architecture and with other disciplines that show this to be the case. Note also my emphasis on students learning rather than being taught. The most effective learning often takes place in informal circumstances and in unexpected ways rather than through formal classes. So in short, as has been mentioned by the previous two speakers and others, the aspects of architectural education that are best learnt well in practice are some, but there are other things that are best dealt with in architectural education. Architectural education perhaps should be seen, as we've already said, as a partnership between education and practice. Students will best gain the necessary know-how, perhaps while in practice, while in academia, our strengths may be about encouraging the students to think differently, perhaps leading to a more long-term impact on practice rather than something immediate. At the Welsh School of Architecture, where I come from, of course, we've been doing this for years. There's nothing new as far as we're concerned. We've offered that unique year in practice. It combines academic work with 9 months spent in an office, and during that time, they're expected to carry out a full diet of university work as well as practice. It's challenging, but they do it. We expect them to spend time reflecting on their office practices, which is seen as a valuable way to consolidate their learning about how practice works, far better than sitting in a stuffy lecture theatre being told about it. We hope that practice, then, in return, can provide appropriate mentoring support. Slightly unusually for us, we also ask the students to undertake a comprehensive design project while they're actually in practice, which balances creative endeavour with a need to resolve a design to stage 4 of the RIBA plan of work. They have to think about feasibility initially as part of a team exercise. They think about costing, they think about clients and user needs, as well as things like environmental performance and construction. They have to, as part of it, produce documents such as design and access statements. But this isn't necessarily just a training element. We use these as a vehicle to help them develop their understanding. They're expected to do things like meet BREEAM excellence for a similar reason. Now, we can't guarantee that all offices are able to provide such a suitable project, so we actually set the students a competition brief which we ask them to follow. This year, it's a multi-faith student centre. We hope that practices will provide the support for the project. Many do, and some even actually putting it on the practice books as an office project, which is really good when they do that. Another thing that we do, which I think is quite unusual, is that we use our alumni to actually conduct the visits to practice. A number of, I've spotted a few of them actually here today who undertake that role. They give additional tuition and mentoring support and discuss the students' needs with the practitioner. As was mentioned earlier, this does happen with our students. Our role as academics is to provide a framework that can ensure that learning taking place in practice is maximised and to meet the relevant professional criteria. This sets it aside from just a year out or the ordinary PPE. We actually charge half fees to allow us to provide that framework. When practice are able to provide that support, it actually works really well. However, when that support is possible, and typically that's more likely to happen with students that go overseas than to this country, difficulties can arise. Sometimes the students are reluctant to tell their practices that they're actually doing university work, which actually comes to a shock from the practices who'd actually quite like to work with them. And some practices are reluctant to support, and sometimes we do get those netters saying, why are you asking us to do this? But we think it's part of being practice. Long hours working in practice can place considerable stress on students. Furthermore, unlike traditional education, and we're setting design projects, we can't provide students with weekly tutorials. So there is a greater reliance on becoming independent learners. We actually think that's a good thing, but I know it can be frustrating amongst the students if they've got a problem. From my experience, I know that the aspiration behind this motion can and does work. Nevertheless, I should emphasise that its success is contingent on a strong partnership between practice and academia in helping students to learn. How we ensure that happens is probably for further discussion. Thank you.